Hi, my name is Ashley Brown, and I'm President and CEO of the Women's Resource Center, and this is Elevating Women's Voices. I am so excited to be joined today by Scott Osborne. Welcome.
Thank you.
Where we're going to be talking about agency and what does agency mean, and how does the power of agency and speaking up for yourself make a difference?
Super important topic.
It is. So welcome. And I'm going to immediately put you on the spot to say, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
And I've already warned you, if you don't brag enough, I will brag for you.
Sure, I'll try. Maybe bragging for women as part of agency. Let's think about it.
Yes.
Well, right now I run an organization called Through Women's Eyes, which is a gender equality organization. We're a not-for-profit in Sarasota, Manatee. We do many things, but among other things, we also run a film festival, which is now in its 26th year. But before that, I was a lawyer. I've lived in 7 countries. I mostly worked with not-for-profits, and I worked on all kinds of programs, 3 times in Africa and many years in India, and really got into studying gender issues and masculinity and women's rights from that side. So I've done that. I've also been a Montessori teacher. I've moved around a lot. So I've had a very circuitous but wonderful career so far.
Well, and we are so happy to have you with us. And the audience is in for a treat as we dive into this conversation. And I want to give some context that this is part of a series, and you did just a video for us that's a slideshow, so we don't get to see your lovely face.
Absolutely.
But talking about gender socialization, gender boxes, and we're going to have another video about that, an interview where we talk deeper about it, but just encouraging people to check out other things on the website. So, first things first.
Can I also say I have a website which has tons of gender equality resources available for everyone, and that's escotosborne.com, and we can put that on there. I have lots of good gender equality resources.
Yes. Well, and I think the best part of today's talk is starting with, what does it mean to have agency? What is it? What does it mean?
Exactly.
Why is it important? All of those things.
Why are we talking about agency? Isn't something we usually say with one another, but it's a really interesting concept, and I think especially for women, because agency means control over one's own life. Do you have influence? And in addition to practical control, do you feel you have control? Do you feel that you can really be an actor in your own life? And it sounds very basic, but amazingly, many of us do not. We do not have those degrees of freedom, either practically speaking or in our brains and our bodies. We don't really feel that we do. And it influences so much, our careers, our personal life, our parenting, whatever we have about how we feel about this concept of agency. And researchers, I don't just make this up, social science researchers really have looked at the differences between men and women on this, and it's very marked.
And it ties so beautifully in with elevating women's voices, with the whole idea of this campaign when we started at the Women's Resource Center is helping women get more engaged civically, politically, understanding the systems and the policies and the dynamics that impact our ability to live our life to the fullest and to have just economic independence being important. But this thought of truly understanding who you are and what matters to you and what your values are is, I think we take for granted that everyone's comfortable with that.
And amazingly, we're not. And I think it's really important to set it in history, too, because it's only really very recent in the concept of history that women have had much control over their lives. That's just a statement of fact. We do have global patriarchies. Women certainly did not have economic independence. They didn't have reproductive choice. They didn't have choice over marriages. So many things for the vast swath of history in almost all societies. Women didn't have that control. So it sort of shouldn't surprise us that it's just coming to us now. So in the last 50 years, we've seen this sea change in women's economic lives, in their personal lives. But that's a pretty short period of time in terms of social change. All of our mores don't really catch up with that. But, they're still there in that concept. And I just want to say, it affects so many aspects of our lives, whether or not we have agency. The professional life is, one we sort of might think of. Does a woman feel comfortable asking for a raise or making statements at work? And we know that that's challenging for many women, but we also know that for social reasons, women often aren't taken as seriously. There's something called idea capturing, so there's a lot of forces at work that show up in terms of agencies. We know women historically experience medical gaslighting. You know, their medical issues are not taken as seriously. We know often in women's personal lives, they don't have the same degrees of freedom, often because of economic dependence. So there's a lot of factors that play into it. I like to tell women who might be thinking about this or struggling with it that they are not alone. History has a good explanation for this. It's not just in your head or your body that you're thinking this.
And it's not an issue of esteem, like a self-esteem issue of I'm not worthy or I don't deserve, which certainly they're underlying, not to minimize self-esteem issues, but there really are patterns, structures, behaviors. I think it's interesting. My adorable 7-year-old granddaughter informed me a couple of weeks ago when they were visiting that I'm from the 1900s. I was like, well, hey, that's
sense of history here.
so rude to point that out, but it kind of made me giggle. But when we think of really, it was not that long ago that women, if you were a married woman, you could not get a credit card without
1970s, early 70s.
Early 70s, which is, you know.
No, it's a blink of an eye in terms of changing people's attitudes. Absolutely. And I think often too, you know, many women, they struggle perhaps to speak up for their own needs and desires. And that's part of agency. And it sounds almost kind of trivial, speaking up for your needs or desires, but women are very strongly socialized to put the needs and interests and behaviors of others first. And sometimes we don't even realize how much that is part of our DNA. And when I say our, I totally get there are exceptions. But we're talking about generalizations, how women are socialized very much to really take into account first what other people are doing, what they want, what they need. And so for women to put their own needs first, professionally, personally, they almost confuse it with selfishness or narcissism, you know, when in fact it's really just having some sense of agency, having a legitimate request, perhaps discussing that, navigating it. Many women are unfamiliar with that dynamic. We often haven't seen it, perhaps in our mothers or other older women that didn't have that. So it's kind of normal that it comes with difficulty. I think we can change it, but it's not surprising, I should say, that it comes hard for many people.
Well, and people pleasing.
Yes.
That is, you know, again, understanding we're talking in generalities. That's a great way to say that. But I think women suffer from people pleasing more than men in general. And it's that, am I going to disappoint? Are you not going to like me if I say no, if I draw these boundaries? And I do feel that women have a much harder time drawing those boundaries professionally, personally, whether it's a family dynamic. And so are there some practical things we can do to shift that language in our head? Or is it practice, or is recognizing it the first? Is that admitting you have a problem?
Recognizing it is the first. I also think, you know, because we said speaking up is a big part of it, I think don't pick the hardest thing in life. If you've really been struggling with something that you feel, whether it's professional, personal, you know, in your home life with a spouse, don't pick the hardest thing and start with that and suddenly say, here's what I need. That's going to come very hard. You're not going to perhaps be familiar with how to navigate that conversation. Take something smaller. Get in touch first with, is this really what I want to do? I often say to women, what is your gut telling you? Do you want to do this? Is this really for you? Is this for someone else's needs? Check that first. Again, I'm not trying to dismiss other people's needs. We all have partners we might love to attend to, and children and parents, but it does mean not disrespecting our own needs and being able to exert them. Again, this is more in a personal setting. In a workplace setting, it's a little different, but I say first recognize, start with something small. Don't pick the biggest one, start with something small, get comfortable with it. I tell people to speak up for women in public spaces, and what this means is to speak up for other women. Recognize when it's happening and support them. Sometimes this is easier than speaking up for our own needs. It's easier to spot it with someone else. That's why sometimes women will support other people, whether it's asking for the raise or talking about the housework or whatever it might be. If you spot it in another woman, say something. Maybe she needs your support, or at least she needs the conversation. So I think that is super important. Also to seek solidarity. It's been proven through fascinating social science research that women, and I would say men, but having the solidarity of other people is very, very supportive. You will sometimes see, and this is not uncommon, women who feel they have a great deal of agency, perhaps professionally, whatever their life might be, but perhaps not personally. Because professionally, she might be surrounded by other women that helps bolster that sense of confidence, that sense of identity. But personally, she might be in a setting where she has no sense of that support. If her spouse is perhaps not as supportive as she would like, she doesn't have that. So seek support in other women. There's a reason why sisterhood is powerful. It was kind of the slogan of the 70s, you know, but it can really be very helpful to get that. That is what helps frame it for people. It's very important for them. I think also too, recognizing that social change is hard and it's slow. Not to say don't do it. I absolutely am an agent of social change always, but to recognize it won't come easily. These are very deep-seated norms. Economic, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, the economic disparity and economic dependence is a very real practical thing. I'm not just saying you can think that away if you don't have economic independence. But in terms of socializing, that takes time. It's a really worthwhile effort, but it does take time.
Well, and I think the practicing and maybe setting up scenarios in which you are able to say no. And I think it does cross that boundary of personal and professional. And I will recognize it in myself of strong boundaries at work, and then I struggle with them personally of, you know, like, oh, I need to, I should, all of those things. And just taking that time to talk through, is it in my best interest? Is it working for me? And being uncomfortable is okay. Like being, making friends with discomfort, because I think as you're practicing this, there is that immediate like, oh my gosh, I just said no to Scott and she probably wanted me to say yes and I've disappointed her.
Right, and that's the concept within women of being okay that if you are going to have your own, whether it's boundaries or needs or desires, totally support that. You also have to be comfortable, we all do, have to be comfortable that not everyone will necessarily like those. Now, I'm not advocating making enemies for no good, but recognize, right, if you say no to me on something, you know, Ashley, maybe that doesn't work out perfectly for her. I have to accept that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Men tend to be a little bit better. Again, this is a generalization, but because women are so attuned to what the other person is thinking and feeling, then we're going to have second thoughts. Ashley's upset at me. I don't know if that's okay. You know, and I think women literally need to practice that and say, you know, Ashley, I'm really sorry. I know this would be better timing for you, but I just can't do it. I hope you can live with that, or however they want to say it. But I think we all have to be okay, perhaps with disappointing someone sometime. That's okay.
Yeah. And do we think, and this goes to another one of the topics and talks when we talk about gender socialization and how as women, we are socialized to be accommodating, be nice, be, you know, why would you be difficult? Those types of things. So there are patterns that are ingrained that we're rewiring, so to speak.
And I think it's very important too that we call out and not fall into when we hear other people doing that. And this shows up a lot in the political and the public arena. Women political candidates will frequently be criticized in terms that are very gender coded, whether they're shrill or they're difficult, doesn't matter what party. Women candidates will tend to be referred to in these gender coded words. If you hear that, call it out in yourself or talk to other people about it. You know, if you have any involvement, write a letter to a newspaper or something. So be aware of and don't let those things slide. Social norms are created by small interactions, and we could talk about what to do if you overhear like a joke or something like that that's inappropriate, but don't let those kind of things slide. You know, be attuned for them, because that's how we start to push back. Social change comes not from like one dramatic thing, but from a whole series of small things.
Well, and it's interesting that if you watch a movie from the 80s and some of the language that's used, and I'm not talking about colorful language, but just the language with women and how women are portrayed versus the men, and you can see the changes that have happened since then of like that would not fly today. So it really is building on the blocks of small changes, recognition of patterns, and truly understanding what's important for you.
Absolutely. I hope we're going to hold another conversation about media one day, because media is so influential and it's so powerful on us, but it is. And can we talk a little bit about what I often tell people what to say when they overhear things that are inappropriate?
We do. And I want to talk about economics too. So but let's do because I think
it's real.
It is real that we have friend, coworker, you're at a cocktail party and somebody says something.
Yes. Somebody says a remark that to you is sexist, misogynistic, racist, homophobic, whatever it is. It's very inappropriate to you, but let's focus on the sexist remarks at the moment. And it's often in a social setting, and it might be joking, and typically you don't know what to say. You feel uncomfortable, you know this isn't right, perhaps you're looking at another woman or maybe a man who's also thinking, this is making me uncomfortable, don't like this. It's probably from someone you know and love. People don't know what to do. And I hate to say this, but it matters if you don't respond. It really does. That perpetuates the sense that this is okay, that this is a norm, and we say this and we hear this and we have these beliefs. So I think it's very important to be prepared for those. It happens in social settings. I've talked to moms who were on the sidelines of a soccer game and they'll hear their coach say something inappropriate. It happens in all kinds of settings. So I've done workshops on this we call What Do You Say?, where people literally prepare themselves. And just a short version of that is you can find something that suits your style and personality. You don't feel you have to argue or be combative. It's not necessarily appropriate in many settings, but you have to call it out. Sometimes humor is useful. Many times I've said to people, hey, we're in the 21st century, just letting you know, or something to that effect. All it does is signal you've heard it, it's not okay, change the topic, but you've registered it. Sometimes you can say to somebody, you know, that's really not okay with me. That's all you have to do. You don't have to then persuade them. I mean, if you want to engage in the topic, you can. You don't have to. You can again say, that's not okay with me. I think I'll go over here. You can remove yourself from the setting, but you need to register you're not comfortable with that, or that's really not right anymore. You know, something to that effect, but be prepared.
And I think what you said that's so important is it doesn't have to be combative or argumentative. You can just acknowledge it, say, you know what, not okay. I love the, hey, we're in the 21st century. We're not in the 1900s anymore. That and that's not okay with me. Or often something that I'll use is, you know what I do for a living, right? So working with women and empowering women is just a way. And I think using humor to deflect, or it doesn't have to be, I'm going to get into an argument with a person. It can be done respectfully, and then you can always change your location
and it also signals you're not ostracizing the person. The person may have many other wonderful qualities. That's possible. You know, again, it may be someone you know and love, but you're saying this behavior, this way of thinking, this speech, that can change, you know? And I think that's important. And then you can go on in whatever relationship you do or do not have. And I think humor is good. Remove yourself if necessary, but be prepared to call it out, you know, and then as I say, go on and be your rest of your wonderful self with that person if you want to. If they really continue to be obnoxious, absolutely remove yourself from the situation. Just say, you know, this isn't okay, and remove.
And in family situations, and it's so interesting, I was just having a conversation with a girlfriend last weekend of just the family dynamics and, you know, things that are said, and like, I'm always going to give you a hard time about X, or, you know, we all have those moments. And she started just saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to talk like that anymore. I, you know, get that it's been our pattern, but I'm not okay with it anymore. So let's just move on. And I think her having that sense of agency and recognizing that, hey, this bothers me. And it's not okay anymore. I still love you, but if you want to keep talking like that, I'm not interested.
I'm not in for this. And I think it's important to know that that's okay. The other person, you don't also have to have a reason. It doesn't have to be an argument about why, and you know, this is always funny, or I'm just joking. That's the prime. I'm just joking. Jokes are not just jokes. Jokes have an underlying message. You don't have to necessarily have a reason. You know, trust yourself. You know, if this clearly seems offensive, it's okay to say, that's not right, and without necessarily feeling that you have to marshal statistics or an entire feminist defense. It's not like that.
We will go to your website and we will get our data.
There you go.
So I want to talk about economic impact of having agency, and you touched on it a little bit on whether it's advocating for yourself at work, whether it's applying for a particular job or finding that work-life balance for you. What are some of the impacts of maybe not having agency in terms of your economic security or trajectory?
Sure. And I think we're going to talk a lot more about pay gaps and all in another conversation, but it's certainly
stuff.
all the good stuff, right? It absolutely affects it. It affects not just the jobs you may or may not take. If you do not feel you have that agency, women do what we call self-censor. So maybe it's the type of job that they might seek or go for. Do they feel they have the confidence for a promotion, for some other job, for higher pay? Without that sense of confidence, I don't want to overuse confidence, but some of it is that, that is going to affect their economic life. There's no question. So it's not just in the personal sphere, but we will see it in the way the jobs women self-select for or not, the kinds of positions they take, the economic value, or speaking up for themselves at work. There's some professions, I don't like to stigmatize them, but that are, I would say, almost notorious for not always speaking up for themselves at work. And I kid nurses about this, and I have many friends who are nurses in medical settings, and it's just the environment seems notorious for that. And nurses are overwhelmingly still female. And it's not a coincidence that they often feel they don't have control over their schedules. They're low on the totem pole in terms of authority. There's a lot of reasons in there. But I sometimes say to women, if you all got together, you have a lot of agency as a group of women in that. So you do see how it has economic impacts if women don't develop agency. But I think that the flip side to that is, if women don't have economic independence, for example, if a woman has children and don't have an income of their own, it's very hard to feel within a family setting that you have economic independence in some cases. So I don't want to minimize that. It isn't just a question of confidence if you literally do not have control over any resources. That is absolutely an issue. And when we talk more about social services for mothers and so forth, we can talk about that. But if women, especially in family settings, don't have independent income or independent access to resources and wealth, it's very hard to feel that you have agency. There's no question.
And we are in the political season. We're in the hotbed of the political season. I think when we attach agency to policy or people that we're voting to represent us, it's important to know what are our values, what is important, and understanding our own ideas and being able to research where do candidates fall on that scale of things that are important to us.
Right, and it's always hard to filter out, campaign speak for all candidates from the truth, but I think that is very important. There's another issue that's very important, is to reinforce that women have independent and private voting agency. Women may feel perhaps influenced by other people around them. We also have a lot of issues, certainly in Florida, that very directly affect women this year. So however women feel about that, they really need to know with confidence that they should make those decisions independently and not feel influenced by other people. And we know historically that has been an issue. I mean, women in my grandmother's generation will say, oh, I'm waiting for my husband to tell me who to vote for. Not at all uncommon. You would hear it all the time.
Let's just note, someone said that to me about a month ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's still very much part of it. And she said, I'm a smart professional woman, and I can't believe I'm going to say it, but typically I go to my husband and
I say, what are we doing on this?
Yeah.
But there's so much information available online. There's so much information available online. Ask your friends, because there are some issues that are of direct consequence to women. And again, however you feel about them, you want to know exactly what that means and be able to vote your conscience independently without undue influence, whether you're voting at home, in the ballot box, wherever it is. Yeah.
Right. And I just think it's really interesting. And we chatted about this as we were getting prepped, that you're hearing that messaging now that you're the only one in the voting booth. So no, and it's like, it's sad to me too, that messaging is still part of the conversation with, we're 2024.
Yeah.
And here we are. So, but it is, and I want to make sure we know there's wonderful partnerships, and
Of course.
you
Yep.
have great conversations with, my husband and I have lots of good conversations on debating different, whether it's candidates or things that are going on in the world, but understanding what matters to me and the why is really important, and not just politically, but career-wise, with family relationships, all of it. And I
Absolutely.
think maybe we can bring agency back. Like it's a big,
That should be
it's a
we
big
could do a
thing.
logo, little bumper stickers, bring agency back. You think it would work?
We'll say what?
But I do want to reiterate, obviously, there are wonderful partnerships. If people agree on it, great.
Yes.
Or agree to disagree and discuss. We have to also be more comfortable with that, agreeing to disagree about some things. That's perfectly fine for many people who have, very compatible relationships. But reinforcing that independence, because again, to go back to where we started, historically, women have not had that. It's very, very recently that certainly that they could vote, reproductive choice, financial independence, educational attainment. That's very recent. So we need to be aware of why there's still kind of holdovers that women may feel they can't really use their power.
And I feel like we've set this conversation up that people are going to be like, I've got to go watch the other videos to see what these other things are. So as we're wrapping up this conversation, is there anything we didn't touch on, or that you were like, oh, I really want to make sure we talked about this in regards to agency? Because there's lots of...
There is lots, and there's lots of resources. I do think women should trust themselves more. Women are socialized in many ways not to, which is a whole topic in and of itself. But I wish we could develop that. And I think the thing that I tell people is work on the next generation. I'm not saying that our lives are not going to change, but whether you have children or grandchildren, nieces or nephews are exposed, the next generation, we're socializing them constantly. We are all role models for them. So in the same way that we talked about small conversations and small things, watch that. And, I was a teacher and I do a lot of work speaking to other teachers, and it's amazing the research that shows how early children develop this gender socialization. It doesn't just happen when you're 15 or 18 or 20 and then you're in the workforce. It's been ingrained since very, very early on. So constantly think about whether you're with other children or modeling for anyone who is younger than you. I think that's a really great way to also have us be our best selves.
I think that's a great message. And then I think too, reminding people to be aware of it in yourself. When you find yourself struggling with, and one of my favorite statements my therapist taught me is, don't let the discomfort of no lead to the resentment of yes, which is kind of all part of this. I want you to give me your website one more time.
Sure, it's escottosborne.com, ESCOTTOSBORNE.com.
There you go. And we'll have that on the screen.
Super, thank you.
And I want to thank you for joining us as we talk about agency and the importance of speaking up for yourself as part of the Elevating Women's Voices campaign. And I look forward to my next conversation with Scott.
Thank you.
And I encourage you to check out the Women's Resource Center website, mywrc.org, where you can find links to all of the conversations we're having in this series. Thank you.
Thank you.